Okay, sorry this started late. Had some errand I had to run really quick for my work. Anyway, no one had any questions this week, and I wasn't expecting any. Thus far, it seems like everyone's online. The office hours forum really is about you asking questions about problems. We haven't assigned any problems yet, so there's not much to do there. We'll take this opportunity to give a quick overview of the definition of economics from my perspective as your instructor, and micro, macro. Do a little content stuff, so let me grab my whiteboard here. So first off, let's start with definition of economics. So economics is the study of how agents and by agents in economics, we're going to be talking about individuals and societies allocate or make decisions about allocating scarce resources given unlimited ones. Okay, so that's just really quick. That's one definition of economics. This is probably 90% of the economic textbooks out there have some variant of this definition of economics. We're going to contrast that with economics is the study, so I'll just put ... So economics is the study of how people, or how society, let's do society, makes choices regarding the production, consumption, distribution, and natural resource usage. In a sustainable fashion. So this is the other one, right? So economics is the study of how societies make choices regarding the production, consumption, distribution, natural resource usage in a sustainable fashion. Let's say for an economy. So I want you guys to think about that definition, because I'm going to post a discussion in a second where I'm going to outline all of those things. And what I want you guys to do is to log in and talk about what are the differences between those two different types of definitions of economics. So we can start with what are the similarities and then what are the differences. And I'm going to ask you guys to do that in discussion and read what other people have to say and make comments on it and ask questions if you don't understand. Next week, I'm going to post a video early in the week or even tomorrow, and I'll put a full-blown lecture of how economics works as far as the philosophy behind the definitions and what's happening there. But I want to leave that hanging out there as a question. There's two competing definitions and what's happening. And I also want you guys to think about what's the role of allocation. What's the differentiation between allocation in the first definition and production, consumption, and distribution in the second? Is allocation just a way of simplifying those three relationships? And then the other tie-in that we can make is that between the production, the consumption, distribution, we're really looking at production can be interpreted through a socialist lens or a capitalist lens or even a lens from somewhere in between, which I'll talk about in the future. Or we could, and then we can view the consumption and the distribution as being a function of markets and supply and demand, which are fundamental relationships in economics. So that's all I want to say about the definition of economics right now. But economics in recent time periods has taken itself to expand and cover everything. We have economists talking about happiness, economists talking about religion, economists talking about feminist issues and ecological issues. And really they've done this through the guise that everything in the world is scarce. And so scarcity plays an important part and role in viewing that world. So if we move from the definition of economics, very quickly we get into the subdivision. You guys are taking microeconomics. There's another class that I teach, macroeconomics. And then there's the reality that up until, maybe the 50s, everyone just took economics, even a little bit after the 50s. The division into micro and macro is fairly modern, and it's a little artificial, right? And to say the least. So normally we think of the division simply as microeconomics reflects individuals, households, and firms, and maybe a small localized region like a community or even a city. And macroeconomics is concerned with the large-scale macro movements of the economy. I want to break it down a little further, is that everything, to a modern macroeconomist, everything is microeconomics, right? So a macroeconomy is built on the backs of thousands, if not millions, of little microeconomies. And this is called the micro foundations of macroeconomics. It's a more modern theory. It's not used too often in the undergraduate economics curriculum, but it's good for you guys to know. So if we view a macroeconomy as composed of the individuals, what's really separating out macroeconomics? And what I'd like to proffer is that macroeconomics creation really comes out of the Great Depression, and the fact that we wanted to understand how is it that how can we say with certainty that an economy is good or bad? So prior to the Great Depression, it was, in the aftermath of Great Depression and the invention and creation of a lot of ideas in economics, there was little way to say the economy was bad other than anecdotal evidence. There was no science or there was no research behind it. You just said, well, it looks bad because there's a lot of people lined up on the street trying to get food. There's a lot of people doing X, Y, Z. But that's not too helpful of a concept at the end of the day. So what I'd like to offer instead is that macroeconomics evolved out of a need to define how bad or good an economy was. And that badness or goodness is always relative to what came before. And so we measure economies, and a lot of macroeconomics is concerned with measuring the size of the economy or gross domestic product, the amount of production, measuring the employment being utilized, measuring the capital rates, how much equipment's being utilized, how many factories are sitting idle, measuring inflation rates, the change in monetary value, measuring money. Macroeconomics can be concerned with all sorts of things, even things like was reading recently about some hedge fund guys who are concerned with the amount of new money being paid in Medicare taxes as a proxy for growth in small businesses before we see that show up in the data to see how good the economy and the macroeconomy are doing. And by the way, if you want to know the answer, is there has been almost zero growth this year in the amount of payroll taxes being paid for Medicare taxes and Social Security taxes. And what that means is small businesses they're not doing bad. They're not probably doing all that great either from a macroeconomic perspective. They're kind of sitting still on their earnings. But we'll see that picture better when we get to tax season next year and see how people did this year, because tax season is always reflective. So when we move beyond macro, then it's concern of what the federal government and what the Federal Reserve or a central banking authority can do to influence those variables to make the economy better or worse. And if you're in a macroeconomics class, we'd study all of that. But that's what macroeconomics is. It's concerned with the big picture items. Microeconomics is really concerned with the individual, the household. So it might be, how does a household respond to a change in taxes? That's a micro concern. But how does society respond to a change in taxes is a macro concern. So that's our division between micro and macroeconomics. In economics, we have another distinction. It's between positive and normative economics. This is they're simple terms. They come out of philosophy. Positive is supposed to be more scientific. It's a statement of what is, or and I don't want to say facts, but it's a statement of what is. Positive statements don't have to be true, but they have to be able to be found to be false. False might be the more correct way of saying it. So we can make the statement, Stockton is a low crime city, which most of you know to be false, but that would be a positive statement because I'm saying this is what it is. You can prove it correct or false, right? When we get to normative statements, these are philosophic or ethical statements or religious statements. I believe that unemployment, I believe that taxes should be higher so that more money is redistributed to poor people. That's a very normative statement, right? That's not a statement of what is. That's not even a state. I can't even go out and I could go out and measure it, I guess, but I can't really make a claim that it's true or false. It's just a statement of my belief. In our course, we're mainly concerned with positive statements. And in my videos, I'm a lot of times concerned with normative statements because I think the normative statements sometimes are more interesting. But you have to understand how to derive or get the results or calculate the numbers to get to the point where you can then start making normative claims and then evaluate different normative claims. Your ability to evaluate a normative claim more often than not, unless it's truly about your belief structure, is relative to your ability to evaluate positive claims or scientific claims in the first place. So people go out there and they say, I want to investigate this issue of whether inequality is good or bad. Well, first you have to do a lot of positive research. You have to actually go out there and you have to study what are the current inequality levels in the region you're looking at in, say, the United States. What does inequality mean? How are you going to define the metrics? What's it mean to be, for example, using recent political things in the last 2 years, what's it mean to be in the 99%? I mean, for me, that's one of the more difficult questions because I would argue, well, I'll put it this way. I'm what am I, a 7.3 percenter. I think I'm in the top 7.3% of wage earners in the United States. And I would say that I have a lot more in contact or a lot more economically in relationship to someone who is in the bottom 99%, someone who makes, let's put someone at the low end, makes $30,000 a year, than I do to have, say, with a hedge fund manager who made $20 million last year, right? And so what's it mean to say that someone's, what is inequality and what are these disparities? That's a lot of positive research. Then we have the evaluation of, do we get good or bad outcomes from this? This is positive research. The claims made, though, or all of these claims really are, and all of this positive research is surrounding an issue that someone like Thomas Piketty does or other economists. All of this research, though, is really to get to understanding a normative concern, which is, I believe inequality is bad, and then they're trying to do positive research to show that to be true or not to be true. So that's the relationship between positive and normative economics. In the homework, you'll find different claims, and your job is to evaluate those claims, whether they're true or false. Then the final thing I want to touch on today is just models. Models are used in economics. They're similar to the difference between different layers in Google Maps. You can have a street view where you're walking down the street, looking at what you're walking towards, and you can have a view of the whole country to get from here to New York City. Which model, which map you want to use, how detailed it is determined by the questions you're asking and what you're trying to do. So we think of using the street view. If I want to get from Delta College to Starbucks across the street, I would probably not choose the national level map layer, right? I mean, if I look at a map of the whole US to figure out how to get across the street, it's not going to give me a lot of useful information. Likewise, if I use a map that gets me from the street view map to get from here to New York City, that's going to be a little troublesome as well because there's too much detail in that map. So anyway, but economists use models. Models are important and models are simplifications. I'm going to teach you models, but I'm not going to expect you guys to create your own models at this point because that's a little bit more of an advanced topic, although we will have you recycle and reuse models that you've been taught to create adaptations on them. But models are important. It's important to know what you're leaving out, though, sometimes. In fact, one of the things I like to focus on when I'm teaching economics is the exceptions to the rule, right? So we want to know the assumptions of a model, what needs to happen for this model to work. And that's important to notice because sometimes reality doesn't give us the terms we need for the model to work out perfectly. And when we don't have the conditions for the model met, it means our results, not that they're false, it's just they might not be as good as they could be, right? And so we need to understand that sometimes models, reality is reality, and models reflect reality, sometimes good, sometimes poorly, but we need to understand that distinction. The way I like to put this is I have a friend who teaches chemistry and biology, and it was he was tutoring a student at one point, and the student was asked to calculate the energy expended in a chemical reaction that they did in a laboratory experiment. And the student went through all the steps of the model to calculate the amount of energy, came up with a number, and my friend goes, "That's false." And the student goes, "But I did all the steps. I used the cookbook. I followed the directions. Everything should be fine." And the instructor goes, "No, it's false. You look at your number." And the student, it took about 5-6 minutes for the student to realize that the number they had written down couldn't be possible given reality. They had calculated that they had done a laboratory experiment that expended more energy than the sun does. And if that had happened in their laboratory, I'm pretty certain everyone involved would be dead. So anyway, in the future, ask questions. I'm releasing a lot of homework assignments today, so you guys can start working. You're going to have a week and a half to get those done before we go on to next section if you're going to be pacing yourself appropriately. I require competence, so you guys have to get through the assignments to a certain level in order to move on to the next section of the course. And I will also be putting up the payment module, and I'll put up a little video with that on how to use it. Should be self-explanatory. People in the past haven't had too much problem. And once again, if you have any financial difficulties, and I know some of you have already emailed me, but just email me, ask for a code, and I'll take care of getting that done for you. Anyway, have a good day. Ask questions in the future. Ask them early and often, and I'll try to help out where I can. Thanks. Bye.